So first of all, welcome to everybody joining Remote Prospecting 101. I'm Simon Lang, and I'm joined by Cal McEwen. We're from Gold Vision CRM. And we're holding this session this morning, described as Remote Prospecting 101. And what we mean by that is if you happen to be experienced in remote prospecting, that's great. You're very welcome. There may be some ideas that you find interesting. For the rest of us, where the idea of entirely remote prospecting is something relatively new that's been thrust upon us, then it might be interesting to share some ideas about what we're finding is helpful and what we're finding works. The key issue here is that the business environment has changed quite considerably since even last year. And this really is something in response to that. So a good point to start from is if Cal takes us through some of the things that we've seen as changes in recent times.
Sure. Well, as it stands, there's a lot of noise out there in the prospecting world at the moment, and there has been throughout the entire time of 2020. And at first that seems counterintuitive, right? We've got a lot of people working from home. We've got a lot of people furloughed. So why exactly is it noisier than ever? Well, I believe it's specifically for that reason that it's noisier than ever. So let me sort of explain. Now, as we all know, some of the traditional lead sources available to us to generate new business, whether it was attending industry events, exhibitions, or simply dropping in on a prospect, if you can believe we used to do that, are no longer viable. And what that's resulted in is a few things. Now, the first is that many of the traditional lead sources that we had available are no longer viable. So what we've opted to do instead is double down on the avenues that we do have available. So namely email, social, phone, etc. And that's understandable, because what else are you going to do? But it does have one significant downside. And that downside is that these channels are now heavily saturated. The sheer volume of the outreach taking place through these channels has our prospects sort of grown tired and unresponsive to our efforts. I mean, if you're getting 96 prospecting emails a day, how thrilled are you going to be at opening the 97th? You're not, basically. And what's more, to add sort of insult to injury, the large majority of these outreach attempts are poorly formed, and even worse, so poorly targeted. So they're not even relevant to the people that they're aimed at. So that's the cause of the external noise, but we all need to contend with internal noise as well, and sort of a wider behavioural shift. So by internal noise, I mean the impact that working from home has had on our ability to collaborate as a team. So whether it's simply something like a sales stand-up, for example, right through to coordinating sort of team resource to focus on maybe an enterprise prospect, it requires a lot more effort, and it leads to a lot more sort of overlap and duplication of that effort. In terms of behavior, and this is purely from my point of view, I've seen a significant shift towards impersonal contact, sort of with buyers more than ever wanting to deal not with a human, but instead favouring sort of web chat, trials, resources of that kind. And ultimately, when you pair all these factors up, it's meant that it's more difficult than ever to engage with prospects, then transition that engagement into priority sort of opportunities, and then focus resource to ensure we win those opportunities. So 2020 has really changed the roadmap in terms of what remote prospecting and prospecting in general is all about. So that's sort of what I would take as my learnings from 2020. Now I'm just going to do a quick poll in the chat just to see which of these sort of factors is affecting you most, and we won't we won't go through it at the moment. We'll sort of discuss it at the end. But if you could provide your answers and we can discuss it at the end. But yeah, that for me is what 2020 has changed in terms of prospecting.
So I'm going to take you through the remote prospecting steps that we've been trying here. And it's a process. We'll explain these in just a moment, but it really starts with understanding what makes a good prospect. Who are the people you most want to work with? I'm going to present some ideas for working differently, some of which might be a bit counterintuitive. A little bit of a look at where we can find prospects, potential customers, and how you might change the message that you're sending to those people. Hand in hand with that, a look at the various different means of communicating with them, not necessarily any one in particular, but perhaps a combination. And then some tools to help you achieve and manage all of this process, and then summarizing it about ways in which we can be adaptable. So starting with what makes a good prospect, Cal, could you take us through your views on finding what makes a good prospect?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what makes a good prospect is kind of a simple question, but it's not really simple to answer. And really what makes a good prospect will be heavily dependent on a number of factors, some of which will be unique to your company. But as a starting point, we'll need to define our ideal customer profile. Now, for those of you that don't know, an ideal customer profile, or ICP for short, is a hypothetical description of a company that would stand to gain the most from our product or service. It's pretty simple. And the thought behind that is, if they stand to gain the most, they're likely to be the most responsive to outreach, but also become our best customers over time as well. Now, it isn't just hypothetical. We're not just making this up. But it doesn't mean, I mean, it's kind of hypothetical, but it doesn't mean it's not grounded in some form of reality. And the first step in sort of forming this ideal customer profile is to analyze our historic customer data in order to see if we can identify sort of trends in the demographic makeup of our customer base, which will then influence our targeting going forward. And what we're going to be looking at in terms of that is sort of industries that we seem to do particularly well in, even if it's specific. We could go down to a specific niche within an industry if that's our preference. But we also need to consider things like company size at large, because we may have a minimum sort of seat, or we may have quite an expensive product, and companies who are less mature won't have the budget for it. But we also need to consider various team sizes within that company. So say, for example, we're selling tools that enable sales. Well, a headcount in a company generally is not going to be very useful for us. But if we can drill it down to the headcount of the sales team, that's going to be far more relevant to what we're trying to do in prospecting to this company. There's other factors such as company maturity, again, calling back to sort of budgets and where they're at, annual turnover again. And there's also geography, but that's taken sort of a backseat. I mean, and I think it will moving forward as we move towards sort of more digitization, everything's online. But once we've done that and we've sort of come up with a fairly standard profile of our ideal customer, we might want to go a little bit further and talk about sort of the individuals in that organization we wish to target. So that's where buyer personas come in. Very similar in operation to an ICP. It's just basically we're analyzing our customer base, seeing which contacts we do well with, taking into consideration like job role, responsibilities, challenges, etc. Now, the final thing that we need to do is go beyond the data in our CRM. If we have a CRM, I'm imploring you to get one because it'll make your job a lot easier, but it's a presumption. So we need to go further than just that data, and we need to have interviews with stakeholders in our company to work out the finer points of what makes a good prospect. And we need to consider factors like, and stakeholders, I mean, sort of experienced salespeople, customer service, anyone who's got real interaction with your customer base or has had it previously. And what we need to consider are factors like, what's the competitive landscape? Who are we against when we're targeting these people? How price sensitive are they? How frequently do we have to sacrifice margin to win those customers? Are they typically high cost to serve? So do they take a lot of time in terms of resource, account management, support? And then wider issues, sort of, do they align with our company's ethics, for example? Are they in an emerging sector with a high potential for growth? All of these things are particularly relevant when separating what makes a good prospect from what makes a bad prospect. So that's my 2 cents on what makes a good prospect.
So Cal, on your slide, you've got demographics and you've got attractiveness. Would it be fair to say that demographics refer really to external factors? You've got industry and turnover and those sorts of things. And attractiveness really are internal factors about how your business views an ideal customer.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, external factors can only go so far in determining whether something is a good prospect or not. You've got people who in your business who have dealt with these customers who may on paper look good, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're good in a subjective sense and sort of in line with our internal understanding of what a good prospect or customer is. So yes.
So moving on now to an idea of how you might work differently in this landscape, and taking leads and moving them to prospects. What do I mean by that? Well, a lead might be somebody who fits your profile. You've found companies that you think could be a good potential moving forward. Maybe you've started to make contact with those, and there could be quite a lot of those, which doesn't mean that they are ready to buy anything from you yet. So prospects, and again, this is something which might be different in your case. This is all up for your definition, but my definition is that a prospect is a lead who has a timescale towards them buying something. They have a need. So a prospect is somebody who is in your market, who is likely to make a purchase from somebody, whereas a lead is a possible or potential future customer. That's my own definition. That works for what I do. Again, you may have different views on this according to what you do. So this is really about the process of moving potential leads through to prospects that you can sell to. And the first part of that is to qualify your leads. Previously, we talked about a set of criteria, what makes up your ideal customer profile. And that can be broken down into some measurable or quantifiable factors. So whatever they happen to be for you, make sure that you're actually measuring them and putting some measurement towards them. Because as we do that, we're going to use it and move into focusing. And this is absolutely counterintuitive. Spend more time on fewer leads. What that means is you're going to cut out some of the leads that you would otherwise be working on. That's counterintuitive at a time when leads might be in short supply. You might be thinking just sell on everything you can get your hands on. However, if you're spending time on the wrong kind of leads, that's time lost, time that could either be spent more profitably working on leads that are a great fit, or in finding more leads that are a great fit. So what I'm suggesting here is that you focus and qualify hard and spend more time on fewer leads. And how do you do that? Well, you use your factors that you've defined as a form of filtering to identify those people who really, at this point, are not worth spending your time on. Now, just to clarify this, I'm not saying that you would hack away and obliterate forever the leads that are not going to buy from you at the moment. That's clearly not the case. What I'm saying is, if they're not somebody that you can sell to at the moment, set them to one side. there are other ways of dealing with those, but they're not the ones that are worthy of you spending your focused time on at the moment. And the third point here is it's really easy to trip over yourselves internally. And my sneak preview of the poll results, which we'll reveal later, shows me that this is actually a real issue amongst this group of people in the webinar today. So internal communication and collaboration is an issue, and this is one of the areas where your CRM can help. If it's clear who is working on which leads and prospects, then other people are less likely to trip over them. So my question here for the poll is, and if you could leave this in the notes section against the poll, do you have a clear qualification process? So it's a nice easy yes or no thing. What I've talked about here is using the criteria that you've defined in your ideal customer profile to work out, is this somebody that you could qualify in or out? So the question is, do you have a clear qualification process? I'm going to move on a bit now to finding prospects, because this is one of the areas which has changed quite considerably. So what I'm describing here is a way of building up your lead lists and coordinating contact. I'm going to start with social media. So sort of 10 o'clock position on this slide, we have social media. It's a good start point because A, it allows you to research readily the kind of companies that meet your profile and the individuals who populate that company. And it's also a good point for an initial point of contact. And the reason for that, despite everything that Cal has already said about the fact that these communications are more heavily used, is that social media remains a low barrier to communication. It's not too difficult to get some kind of initial contact with people using social media. Another source is events which used to be physical events where we would go to an exhibition hall and meet real people, and it seems like a very long time ago that we did that. They've moved online. There are lots and lots of online events, and they tend to have lobbies and chat rooms, and it's possible to find people who might be in the right kind of area. So as an initial lead, a potential prospect of the future, this is another source that we can find people and engage with them. Who else do we know? Well, there may be networks or groups of people that your colleagues may have contacts. As a business, you may surprise yourself by the number of people that you actually know. And so if you're focusing on a particular group, you know what you're looking for. There may be contacts that your colleagues have if you don't have them, and maybe they can affect an introduction of some kind. The other side of that is there may also be contacts that your customers know. So if you have a good relationship with your customers, it may even be possible for them to, in effect, an introduction to some of their suppliers or other contacts as relevant. Website activity is another big area. It certainly is for us, and I believe the point here is to be highly contactable. So people coming to your website, make it really very easy for them to get in touch with you using things such as simple tools like web forms and web chat. So it's just very, very straightforward for somebody to come onto your website and make an initial contact with you at an early stage. This can also extend to things such as banners that you might have on your emails and other useful communication points, but just make yourself very, very accessible and contactable. And then here is, returning to this point I made on the previous slide, categorizing your leads with qualifying points. The qualifying points relate back to your customer profile, and these are the tools that you're using to determine whether a lead is actually qualifying and deserves you spending your time on it or not. Cal, would you like to talk us through how you might adapt your message?
Yeah, I suppose I just want to start with a sentence in saying that, we're outreaching to people, and people are often, more than the company they work for and their job role, right? So they're individuals with their own interests, motivations, etc. And if we want to have our outreach acknowledged and responded to, we need to appeal to them as an individual and the specific benefits they stand to gain by responding. So naturally, we need to consider our target audience. So more often than not, the level of seniority we're approaching will influence the tone of our message and the language we use. But in any case, regardless of who we're contacting, we need to focus on what our prospects stand to gain from our product or service, and not just the product or service itself. We're not flying our own flag here. We're trying to see how these people can benefit from us as a product or service, and that much should be obvious. But we should also be leveraging our understanding of our prospects' potential pain points and positioning ourselves as a solution, preferably with some element of social proof. And I think that's fairly sort of standard. But I mean, the real key to upping your prospecting in 2021 is to the right-hand side of this slide, and it's to do with personalization. So at first, it might seem kind of daunting to think that I'm going to have to prospect and I'm going to have to personalize my messages. But carrying on from what Simon said, I mean, company website, content pieces, social media, these are all great resources in helping us meet this challenge. They often contain sort of snippets of information that you can use to refine your message and make it something a little bit more bespoke and personal rather than just purely a templated email you've sent to 1,000 people. But the key here is not just to personalize for the sake of personalizing. We have to make it relevant to our pitch. Otherwise, it just seems, it just seems like we're doing it for the sake of it. So that's something that we should keep in mind. But we do need to experiment with this. We need to employ some creativity, some sort of personal touch that shows that we've done our research, we care about the prospect, and that we've taken the time to kind of use that to engage with them. The next is to add value. I don't really like this term because it kind of gets thrown around prospecting quite a lot, and no one seems to have a firm definition of what it actually means. Now, one thing's clear, it's not always sort of about money and discounts. We're not talking about that. But to me, and please correct me in the chat if you disagree, but adding value for me is sort of simply delivering more than what your prospects expect from you. So everyone expects a salesperson to have a pitch and a call to action and stuff like that. But what they don't really expect most of the time is how you can go above and beyond. So maybe you're an expert in a certain field and you can offer advice, or you can introduce them to someone who can. You can introduce them to someone in your personal network who would gain benefit from their service, right through to sharing sort of insights and blogs and whatnot. And by using that approach, in terms of personalizing, so making it relevant and personalized to the person you're reaching out to, and providing them with unique value, we're going to stand a much better chance of cutting through the noise of everything else that's out there in terms of email, phone conversations, etc. If you want to transition onto the next slide, Simon, it leads quite well onto this actually. So we talked about personalization and we talked about multi-channel before, but personalization doesn't just relate to the content of the message, right? It relates to the means by which you contact that individual. Now we won't know that channel until we try all of them. So that's it's imperative that we go about testing this. So we want to utilize all the channels we have available to get in touch with a prospect until we can establish which is the preferred method that they want to engage with us on. And by engaging on multiple channels, you're not only establishing this, you're giving yourself the best chance of getting a response. But once you do have sort of their preferences in mind, it's crucial to make record of that. Again, either on a spreadsheet if you're using a spreadsheet, or in your CRM if you're more up to date. it's absolutely empirical to make note of that, so that if your colleagues then reach out, say in support of your prospecting efforts, or maybe as a result of something else, support, I don't know, they do so through the route that is the most efficient and the most readily sort of responded to. The second point, and Simon's touched on this a little bit before, in terms of being contactable, but using multiple channels doesn't just apply to outbound, it applies to inbound as well. So we need to be maximizing the opportunities that our prospects have in order to engage with us and our content through their preferred method, right? So in short, we need to be making it as easily as possible so that our prospects can get in touch with us. And practically speaking, that might mean, upping our social media sort of profile. So we're posting more content, we're giving them opportunities to engage. We have clear CTAs, call to actions, and contact information on emails. We're optimizing our signature, which is criminally underutilized as a bit of real estate to engage. But then it just comes back to like simple landing pages, web forms, web chat functionality. We need to be thinking wider about how we can expand the way that our prospects can get in touch with us. It's not all about us, it's also about their experience in terms of getting in touch with us as well. So that's something that needs to be considered and needs to be carefully thought out as a rule of prospecting, one that's not so obvious.
The last point there, Cal, recording preferences to enable communication, leads cunningly well into the slide here, which is the prospecting CRM Utility Belt. In other words, so far we've talked about various techniques and ideas. This is moving to how can you practically put this into action? And this is where we would contend having a CRM is going to really boost your ability to manage this multi-pronged approach to reaching out and making contact with new people and then qualifying them and taking them through that process. So there's a number of tools specifically that a CRM is going to help you with. The first is to do with lead management. When you're putting together lists of people who may possibly be of interest, this is probably not data that you would want to have kicking around in your main customer data, whether that's managed on a system or otherwise. So having separate pools of data, separate hoppers of data, for the time being where you're using this for outreach and for prospecting, making contact, is a much clearer and better way. It also means that you can readily track where you're seeing success. So lead management is a function which we use in our CRM, where we can track and interact with different pools of data, whether they come from a source such as an exhibition or whether it's a list we've put together of people that we would like to target. The second tool, marketing automation, refers to something from right earlier on, right back at the beginning, when we were talking about eliminating some of the prospects because they're not a great fit. And I said, well, we're not really talking about completely getting rid of them. We're just saying that if they're not somebody that you're going to be able to successfully convert to a sale or have a chance of doing that at the moment, maybe it's not one to focus on for now. So what you could do is use that as somebody that you are maintaining contact with over the longer term with relevant information. And they might be a pool of people that you send out occasional messages to as a kind of warming campaign, longer term engagement. And that's something which can be handled on a semi-automated basis. So that's a tool that can help with that area. Understanding where you're seeing success, tracking where you've had a return on your investment, largely in time. So managing them well and being able to analyze the information will give you that information. That's the kind of thing that a CRM does really, really well. Knowing when somebody is showing interest is really a very, very helpful tool here. So whether that's in response to an email or another form of action, such as on social media, having the system to be able to alert you that somebody is now showing interest in you and you can decide what action is appropriate based on that. Extremely useful. Again, there's a tool which we use which is called touch points within Gold Vision, and it does exactly that. Right at the start, we talked about the ideal customer profile, knowing your customers in order to extrapolate from that and find more that look similar to that. To get to that information, you might want to look at where you've historically seen success and analyze the information out from that. Alternatively, you may be taking a new direction and saying, well, let's look at who we know or companies in this new sector that we want to get into. So being able to manage lots of data and filter and sort them in that way so that you're contacting the right people, again, that's something that a CRM tool is very good at. Cal was talking about keeping track of correspondence. Extra important if you're working as part of a team and there is a chance that you will be tripping over each other, or somebody else may have perhaps a communication with a different person in the same business. Understanding what's been said and offered previously could be a critical part of that. And again, that's something that a CRM is very good at. Using the right kind of channel can actually go beyond just preferences. There may be strong reasons why some of your contacts really don't want you to get in touch by a particular one means or other. But whatever their preferences are, if they've expressed them to you, it would be unhelpful if you then ended up disregarding them. So keeping track of what their preferences are for communications with you is another good piece of information that's going to guide you about the best way to contact these people going forward. This is by no means an exhaustive list. It's just some of the key practical tools that a CRM will help you with. Clearly, I'm talking from the perspective of using Gold Vision CRM, which I know very well, both working there and previously as a customer of Gold Vision CRM. And these are some of the tools that I find very helpful. So just to summarize, what we've been talking about today is becoming more focused, more targeted, looking for certain types of organizations that you want to make contact with. And then really focusing and becoming more concentrated in your efforts on those that deserve the greatest amount of time. Cal has been talking particularly about relevance and multi-channel. This really refers to your communications and cutting through the noise by making your message more targeted, more relevant, and using different channels. Cal, can you see what happened during the poll earlier?
Yeah, I can actually. The most popular answer in terms of which of these is affecting you most is actually collaboration issues working from home. With the second obviously being the loss of traditional lead sources. I'm quite surprised by that because the collaboration issues working from home are it's one of the more easy ones to fix.
Yes.
So the myriad of tools out there that you can use, including Gold Vision, that can kind of streamline this and make it a thing of the past. I did think that the loss of traditional lead sources would be up there. And I'm just curious as to what people are doing differently, given that they know the fact that these lead sources are, missing. Is there anything else that we haven't thought about that people are utilizing? I mean, like physical send, for example. Is anyone doing that? Is anyone sending out physical mail to people's homes? Or I don't know. So just maybe off the back end of that, we could open up the floor, see if there's any questions, or if anyone's got some sort of comments or insights. That would be awesome.
And I noticed we got a joint for second place with poorly targeted campaigns. So what we thought we'd been seeing from our own personal experience is borne out by what this group today have been seeing, that receiving contacts which are irrelevant and not really for you, presumably part of something which is not very well thought through, and it's a very broad targeting approach that somebody's taken. Certainly I'm seeing lots of that.
Yeah, my inbox has never been so cluttered, to be honest, Simon. I don't envy you and yours, because I imagine it's worse than mine. Does anyone from the sort of attendees, does anyone have any questions at all, or any points they'd like clarification on? Because we're happy to answer, happy to assist.
So if anybody has any comments, just pop them in the chat and we'll happily pick those up. If you don't, that's great. I hope you would find us very readily contactable through the things that we've been talking about earlier. So if you would like to get in touch with us, please feel free to do so. You can contact us readily via the website, which is www.gold-vision.com, where you can engage with us either by phone or web chat or email, however you prefer, and we'd be very happy to talk to you. But if there are no specific questions, then I'd like to thank you all for joining this morning. I hope that's been helpful.
Thank you very much, guys.
I can see one or two people have found that helpful. That's great to hear. And from Cal and I, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to speaking to you in a future session.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.